Actually, Moha is saying that we are okay. I don't know who is, and there are a bunch of people already posted in the new link chat. I don't know. I think we should start. We are
Okay,
already.
I'll get started, and hopefully people can figure out. So hello and welcome. I'm sorry it took us a little time to again work around the glitches. This is life in post-COVID world. So I am Shankar Bhomik, and on behalf of Kendrick, I would like to thank all of you who could join us today. So it's important discussion with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement and what do us people with South Asian roots, what we can do. Before I move on, I would like to thank Chandri Shunando Shobhik, the Executive Committee, Mo Mohua Urmi, Arup Dipannita, and all the members for helping out to reach out to people and helping with this panel. I would also particularly like to thank Jointo for going through the technical glitches and trying to set this up. Because we ran a little late, so the ground rules are, housekeeping is the following. Post the questions on the YouTube link and we will actually try to answer some of them as we move forward. Otherwise, all the questions will be shared with the panelists and they're going to respond to it and we'll post it on our website and the Facebook page, and so that everybody can then have a discussion in the future. Okay, so why today? Why talking about our responsibilities? So Off Kendrick was founded as a progressive theater platform in the greater Boston area in around 2007, 2008. It talked about the immigrant experience of South Asians, particularly Bengalis, to start with. And we believed in doing independent theater and writing our own script, original work, to share our experiences. What ended up happening over time is, inspired by Moth Radio Hour, we have been doing more storytelling and we have engaged a larger part of the South Asian community. And because we have our experiences that come both from experiences here and back where we grew up, we always try to modulate our work in response to what is happening around us. So the current events surrounding the brutal murder of George Floyd that has highlighted the deep structural flaws in the system against Black and other minorities has led us to rethink what we should do. So standing at the cusp of this critical juncture, how do we respond as a community and as a theater group that prides itself in progressive roots? So as a first step, what we decided is to get a group of panelists with, again, roots in the South Asian community, but who has been working in their career at the grassroots level for a long period of time. We have Meena Natarajan, who is a playwright and director at, and the executive and artistic director at Pangea World Theater. Dipankar Mukherjee, artistic director at Pangea World Theater. Nazda Alam, she is a political and social activist and is involved in women's in civic engagement. Kosturi Shen, she's a public defender in Philadelphia. And Natasha Chabria is a legal fellow in the Voting Rights Project at the Lawyers Committee for the Civil Rights United Law. And you can check out their bios, they are online. Shayok Chakraborty is a community organizer with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Anesha Bhomik, who actually just graduated high school, is a community activist and she works as a volunteer for Everyday Boston. Anesha will take over along with Shayok the youth panel, but right now I'll go straight to Meena, and I'll start the basic question about racial justice and the work that they do. Meena, you at Pangea, it has been a 25 years journey. Could you share some of the work that you do and particularly how it highlights the voices of minority people and others.
Thank you so much, Shanku, for having me. I'm really privileged to be here. And I'm speaking from Minneapolis, and just want to acknowledge that we are an indigenous land. This space that we're in is Dakota land. And we always acknowledge that, the land that we're in, when we begin our work. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Pangea. And Pangea is a 25-year-old organization that was created in 1995 and then 96. And we did our first show in 96. And it really began as something that is at the intersection of art and social justice. We began that first work bringing together people from very, very different backgrounds and ethnicities. And we've learned so much along the way of what it means to create intercultural work that is really intersectional as well. Our work is very, very diverse. It includes the voices of many people, and we also really focus on people who have not had the opportunity to tell their stories before. And you know, and really and it's a way for bringing people together in this way. We also do very relevant work. We respond to the time and place that we're in, and so and we the work that we do, we present work of people from all over the world, in fact, all over the country. We do productions. I think I have a couple of photographs of productions that we've done in the past. If Joyantho could show those productions. And so we've done productions on stage. We've also done site-specific productions. Also we work with previously existing work. So we've created work like based on The House of Mango Street, for example, which is a play, which I think I have a photograph of that play that I've sent you as well. And also I'm a playwright and a director myself. And so we've created plays on, so this was House on Mango Street, directed by Dipankar. And we also, and I've written plays like 5 Weeks, which was about the partition of India in 1947. Also, we have something that is called a Directing Institute, which we began in 2012, where we bring together people from totally different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders. This was 5 weeks about the partition of India. And I was talking about a Directing Institute. Our Directing Institute brings together people from different places to learn directing. So it's basically a Directing Institute for people of color and women directors. And we realized that if we had more people of color learning how to direct, then we would have more diverse casts in the place. So we just began it ourselves. So it's the only one of its kind probably in the world. We bring people from across the world here, and we bring people from across the country here, and master directors who learn from each other, who do peer exchange. And it's a very exciting space every summer. And apart from that, we have community-based programs on our street. So that is an example of one of our community-based programs. It's called Lake Street Arts. It takes place on our street called Lake Street, and you'll learn why Lake Street is so relevant to us right now with the Black Lives Matter movement and what's happened on the street. So this particular piece is called The Colors. So we've done many, many, many pieces as part of Lake Street, you know, youth poetry on the windows of the businesses of Lake Street. We've done a show about immigration of the Latinx community. We've created pieces about home and what it means to be home on Lake Street. We've created site-specific pieces, performances and theater. And this particular pillar that you're seeing is called Colors of Lake Street. It was led by an elder Colombian artist. And it was really about what does color mean to you and your families and so it became a place of exchanging stories about what colorism was for different immigrants, for African Americans, for people who are white, for people who are from different backgrounds and ethnicities, for indigenous people. So it became like about 200, about many people contributed to the pillar. And then it became a conversation about race with 300 to 400 to 500 people that we brought into our studio as we put the mirrors on the pillar of Lake Street. And now this piece, it's called The Colors of Lake Street Pillar, lives as a visual arts installation in something called the Global Market in the middle of our street. And so it's still there today, so people can take a look at it and engage with it and have conversations around race, when they see that. So it's really so these are the kinds of work that we do. It's deep engagement with the community. It's work that really decolonizes because it's so based on relationality with people. And it's work that we've been doing for 25 years in this way at Lake Street.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just want to tell the audience that, I mean, Meena and Dipankar has been one of my primary inspirations of doing theater in this country. So getting to you, Dipankar, one of the questions that, so you were at the epicenter of what happened in May with George Floyd. It's one block away from the murder of George Floyd. And I remember talking to you, we were talking about some of my work at that point, and you had told me that I'm having sleepless nights, Shanko. So could you kind of take us through that experience, both literally and metaphorically, what has been happening?
Thank you, Shanko. Thank you for having us on. I really am, we are living the truth that we have a mission statement for 25 years. Yes, it sort of adds, I guess, some sort of gravitas to our work. But after May 25th, there's a line on the sand. And that line needs to be so deep that we cannot move from there. We should not move from there. We do not want to go back to whatever the cliche term new normal is, because we want to stay there. We want to stay there because everything that we related to over here, our pharmacies, our studios, our restaurants, our anything owned by immigrant families, Black families, Latinx families, LGBTQ family. I mean, all of it is burnt. It's burnt. And then even in our streets over here, there were these cars of white supremacist people who came from out of town. They did not, they would come in and they are so well organized. They would zoom like NASCAR into our street. They'll stop there, and these very simple, non-harming type of young white dudes would come. They would get into the car and they would go to another area to loot. So then we were just about 4 hours too late, and then I started taking out all our set pieces, and we started, people from the community came and took many of our set pieces to board up their shops because they were looting. And it's very ironic, the flat which was guarding our street was actually a flat of a play with Sufi poetry written in Arabic by a playwright called Ismail Khalidi. It happened to be that when I saw the photographs, and it was a Palestinian playwright's barricade that was stopping these looters who were these white supremacists that came from out of town. And so everything around this street got burned. The police precinct, that was, that really, when the police abandoned, and the next day, when everything was getting burned and everything was getting broken, there was no fire engine, there was no fire brigade who came to put down the fire. They could have done that, but they chose not to, because they are saying we will not enter the space without police protection. And so we literally saw this community burn. Ruhail Islam, who had this restaurant where they were all our collaborators. We have done our community gatherings there. We have done our, this is the, thank you, Shanko. This is all that's left of a brilliant, vibrant space of community gathering. Nothing is left, it's just ashes. And the smell of burnt wood, and the smell of burnt furniture, and the smell of, it's almost smell of this damn injustice. That injustice has a smell, and we could smell it every day. And even when we pass over there, there is just nothing. These are our collaborators. These are the places where we perform. El Nuevo Rodeo, at least Gandhi Mahal has a few structures that are still, this is El Nuevo Rodeo, where, it is a 3-story building. In fact, we are now searching for our own performance space, and we were about to, see this space as a possible. We wanted to buy it, but then, unfortunately, this is what is left of the visions that we had on Lake Street. So that is why I just wanted to say how May 25th May 25th is a line where our mission statement, whatever it has been for 25 years, I'm not talking about wordsmithing the mission statement. I'm talking about how do we go deep into that crack of May 25th. Before May 25th, there was a pandemic, which was the COVID pandemic, and which we all, I don't know whether we'll ever get used to it, but that's what we were. But then we deconstructed the damn word pandemic to include police brutality, white supremacy, and the COVID. Those are the three pandemics that we are dealing with right now. And so how we responded to it, we call ourselves relevant theater. So what we did, that we got together our staff. First of all, we decided that all 12 of our staff members, we're going to keep on payroll. It was surprising that multi-million-dollar theaters over here, they've all let go of 98% of their staff. And they say they hit rock poverty from a $30 million, $40 million annual budget to now they've reached 20 million. Right there is one of the reasons why this went down. And it didn't go down only with George Floyd. Before that, it was Philando Castile. Then is Brianna, then Aubrey, then Rashad. It's non-fucking stop, right? And so that's why what we did was all our staff members, first of all, we assured them that they will have their job. We started this vision together, we'll end it together. So not to worry about losing their job. And secondly, we commissioned each one of them, with some source of money, so that each one of these artists respond to what is going down our street. There were visual artists, there were playwrights, there were performers, there were community members. Even our accountant wanted to just take the W-9 of all these theaters, this multi-million-dollar industry and us mid-sized organization, and just put it up on a clothesline. So everybody desired to just respond to what is happening. So suddenly, unfortunately, the word relevance, the word response, the word, how do we create solidarity and intersectionality between our communities came to the forefront. So that's a little bit of what is happening now in our street.
So that is the ground reality, and that's what we are also trying to grapple with. So I will now move to Shayok, who is, I know, who has been a community organizer, and you have been organizing at the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Can you talk about some of the work, because I'm familiar with some of the work at GBIO in terms of the police reform that you've been trying to work with the state legislature, but can you talk about how you're trying to bring the community together, and some of the salient points in terms of police reform that you're trying to talk about in the Greater Boston area?
No, appreciate that, Chankomesho. And yeah, thank you for putting together the panel, and yeah, very powerful what you just said, Chankomesho and Minamashi. So as Chankomesho said, my name is Shayok. I graduated as a public policy major from Pomona College in 2019, and I spent about 3 years organizing in Los Angeles around primarily immigration and affordable housing issues before joining the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization as a community organizer. And yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of community organizing in this whole thing. There's theater, there's legal advocacy, there's mass protest. What role does this play? And really, I think what we do at GBIO is build people power in a sense of long-term relationships among leaders and communities who can take sort of broad political action together that's focused around strategic and specific demands. And that's how we can sort of, our role is sort of converting some of the energy on the streets into legislative momentum. And so just a little bit more about GBIO. We call ourselves a broad-based organization, which means we come from various race, class, neighborhood all across Boston. We're interfaith, we're a civic power organization. We're not focused on a single set of issues, but essentially it's really just whatever people want to work on. And so we consist of 41 congregations across Boston, represent about 45,000 people. And my job is really just part of it is just going into congregations and talking with people and sharing stories and doing one-on-one conversations, like what are you about and what am I about, and trying to show that I'm real and that we're trying to do something together and build a broader form of power. And And then it's coaching and development of leaders, to take public action, to, negotiate with a representative, to put a campaign together to turn people out. And, again, it's a pretty diverse coalition, which I think it relates to what we're doing here today, which is, again, South Asians, allyship with Black folks. GBIO consists of Black AME churches and, suburban white synagogues, and you have mosques, immigrant mosques, you have Bangladeshi and Caribbean public housing tenants. And I'm working with all those people. And really the crux of what we do, like how it is that we're able to make any kind of changes, because, we can put together, I'll give you an example, a concrete example. In 2017 for criminal justice reform, we were pretty instrumental in getting that together, because we were able to pull together 1,500 people from across Greater Boston and tell the Speaker of the House, listen, we need you to come address these 1,500 people assembled. And we're going to ask you a very specific question. Are you going to put this criminal justice reform bill through the session or not? It's a very clear, simple yes or no question. The Speaker could not deny that, right? You cannot exactly say no to 1,500 people coming out, not in reaction just to a headline, but we're here, we're going to stick around. We've been around for 20 years. We're going to be here for another 20 years, right? And so, we're playing a similar role here with police reform. We're backing the 10-point police accountability plan put forward by the Black and Latino Caucus and the Massachusetts House. So that includes a number of pretty strong measures, such as, mandating that you have to have an independent investigation of any kind of police-related death. You cannot just have the police union and the internal police bureau just, look into it and then let officers go. You have to have an independent investigation. Banning chokeholds. Another piece is licensing for police officers. Just like, a beautician needs to get licensed in the state of Massachusetts, but if you're a police officer and you commit abuse, you could get hired somewhere else, right? It's all right. You could just go and head to another department. We want that to stop. And these are measures that are very, very fiercely opposed by police unions. Across the state, they are mobilizing in strength to stop these bills. But we are also on the other side, right? So, we have hundreds of people across neighborhoods who are engaging. We have 31 representatives we're engaging across the state. And in constituent meetings, right? Virtual constituent meetings, just to send the message that, listen, there's 70 people in your district who want to come out here and ask you this question. And those 70 people have families and congregations, and they go home, and, we reflect your people. And so if you want to keep the implicit message is, if you want to keep office, if you want to be in office in November when the elections come around, you need to stand up for police accountability. You need to vote for this 10-point plan and make sure that these things happen, right? So, and as an example of that, Shankar mentioned you actually came to an action we put together. Yep. When we launched this campaign about 3 weeks ago, where we had about 300 GBIO.
And I did make a call.
Yes, you did make the call, right? Exactly. And we had Black leadership in the organizations telling their stories about policing in Massachusetts and why we need this. The next day, we flooded the Speaker of the House's office with 500 phone calls. And I will tell you, the staff, we got angry phone calls from the Speaker's staff. Why are you targeting us? Oh, this is crazy. You should talk to the police union. No, you represent us. And so we're going to be calling you. And, they complained and complained. But I mean, by the end of the day, the Speaker had sat down with the Black Latino Caucus head. And at that night, he made a public commitment to passing a bill with these pieces of legislation in it, right? So it's not out of the gate yet, because the police union is hard at work just trying to, make it weak and symbolic, essentially, and make it nothing more than just a piece of paper, right? As opposed to real reform. So essentially, just to bring it back, again, the role we play is, there's the mass protest, but in 6 months, basically, like, who's going to be there? And we're trying to be that organized counterbalance to the influence of something like the police union, right? So
thank you for really explaining this whole idea about grassroots democracy, since I think you are directly involved with it. I'm going to move over to Nazda Alam. Nazda, you have a long history of working for women for color. You have your own organization. Can you talk a little bit about, the focus on social justice for women, and more importantly, I know you have worked with Muslim women, and can you talk about the relationship with the police, and what are some of the direct things you have observed, and how you are hoping that things would be reformed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Hi, good afternoon, the audience. I am so pleased to be here with all these respected panelists. And Shankoda, personally, I am very pleased to see your relationship with this group and me, and I feel privileged to know you. So my story is a little bit longer than Ted's. Over here, I was born in a small town in Bangladesh, and I grew up in watching Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and poet Nazrul Islam pictures in my living room. So my activism, it didn't start here. It's a long back. My home environment was like protest, injustice, but peaceful resolution. That's how I grew up in there. So 1982, me and my husband came as a student in Houston, Texas. And we stayed there for 8 years and moved to 1988 in Massachusetts. And within United States, I have seen a whole different world, the Texas and New England. I mean, in Texas, anyone did not even ask where I'm from, always ask in Spanish. So they only knew Mexican. That's how. So I came in Massachusetts, and my first as a graduate student here, and my first involvement of the civic engagement was 2003, the immigrant worker freedom rides all over the country we did. And I was one of the organizers from Massachusetts, and I organized 2 full buses of immigrants, especially Bangladeshi Muslims and other immigrants from Massachusetts to New York. And I rode bus ride from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, DC, New Jersey, and New York. And then I was so privileged from Washington, DC to New York. I sat next to Congressman John Lewis. That was my first involvement with a giant activist. So anyway, then it came, my first grassroots organization campaign was Howard Dean, 2004, the presidential campaign. And then I was always with the interfaith activism in Texas and here, but it came to the highest point after 9/11, when the Muslim were as a negative connotation. And I felt that as a Muslim female, I think I should speak up who I am as a human being. So I joined in an organization in Boston, especially Metro West, where I live in Western town, the organization called Daughters of Abraham. The Muslim, Christian, and Jewish women, we all together make an organization and kind of unity. It started with a book club, but then we did a lot of civic engagement. Our goal was, because all 3 religions came from Prophet Abraham. So rather than we're saying, I am Muslim, I'm Christian, why don't we say that we are the daughters of Abraham? That's the way I can. And then 9/11, and then 2008, I started the civic engagement, actually the Muslim Voter Registration Project. I am still the chairwoman of the Muslim Voter Registration Project from 2008, 12, 16, and 20. And I am also working with that. And we found out in 2008 that there are 2.5 million Muslim voters in the United States. It grows right now. So that was my civic engagement piece I started. And still we are working there. And then 2017 and 18, where the Rohingya atrocity happened in Myanmar. And then I felt that this is a Muslim women, it was a mass rape, killing, torture, anything you say. And then I said, I wanted to make something to tell the world that this is happening. And that was part of my Me Too movement. I wanted to try that Muslim women atrocity and the Me Too movement. I did organize 2 rallies in Boston Common with the other organization about the Rohingya issue. I met Senator Markey and the Foreign Relations Committee. I was also working with the Senate, the hearing. So unfortunately, 2016, the election, the Trump, it just all stopped now. And then 2018 and 2019, I went personally to Cox's Bazar, the refugee camp. I stayed there for 2 months, 2 weeks, 8 weeks. And then I created the documentary called Rohingya Atrocity Against Women. We try to show the world the Me Too movement. Over here, we have seen the Me Too movement actually with the affluent women. They are saying what they happen, but it's happening all over the world. So my documentary was to tell the women other side of the world that they are part of the Me Too movement. And also we wanted to show that documentary that the military action is always against the women, rape, killing, separation from the family or children. But the point is the women are not the frontline soldier and they are not the policymaker, but they are the one always be the frontline military. So we mentioned in the documentary that is there military personnel, policymaker can think they change their training in military, how to behave with the civilian in a war zone. So that. And then 2018, I created my own organization, Nazda Alam Foundation for Muslim Women Civic Engagement and Leadership. That was the documentary we produced. And also 2019, I did, my organization, we did a speaker series just to be, we had the district attorney, Marian Ryan, she talked about the Muslim and other immigration right and under Trump's administration, what we need to do. Then we had second presentation was with Middlesex Sheriff, who talked about, because there were many Muslims were behind the bar, but they didn't know what to do, how to get bail, and it was just new to them. So we thought that that will be a good way to give some educational information to the public, and we did that. And then our third among biggest presentation was with the Secretary of State, William Galvin. We talked about the Census 2020. So how important to be part of the census is not only Muslim, all immigrant, and that's what we have done. And then police and the female relationship, I can say it's nothing new with our South Asian community. Back our homeland, we always have seen the police always take side of the male in case of domestic dispute, marriage dispute, community dispute, that women are always the victim back in our country. And I wanted to share a joke with, not joke, it is a real statement by a rickshaw. When I was in high school, I was in rickshaw, and then one rickshaw, he spoke Urdu and he was repatriated from Bihar. So the police, the group of police was just beating the young kids over like 10, 15, and we didn't know what. And I was so nervous. And the rickshaw looked at me and said, "Beta, Betty, don't worry." And then he said, "The police ka bachcha, kobi nahi acha. Jo ko hai acha, wo bhi shor ka bachcha." And I realize now, these days, is how true that statement was. You know, in here, the police brutality we have seen last, I mean, I've been here 39 years. I have seen more or less. But the Shwankar Daje said about May. Now our role would be, and also I wanted to mention that our South Asian immigrant, we are very privileged immigrant group. We are not white, but we are privileged. So it doesn't matter to me what happened on the street. You know, we have a good job, we have a good house, our kids going Harvard and MIT, and then that's it. So that is the point I wanted to make, the women, just the basic thing, especially the Bangladeshi and Muslim women, I said, just involved in a PTA, your school PTA, where your kids go through. So we know, have a coffee morning with the neighborhood women, or join a book club like the Daughters of Abraham. So these are the first step, and it is, the women are really realizing. And I have seen many our South Asian, even though we are very privileged group, but our women's personal life are not always safe. We just don't see that, or we don't tell that. So I encourage the women, especially the Muslim women, not to tell your story, but hear the other people's story. So then you can connect yourself, because we will not say about mine, but if I hear somebody like me, maybe realize that will come to us. And here, African American female are much more vulnerable than us, the immigrant, privileged immigrant women. And that is really eye-opener for us, and tell the women that this is the same thing, your women, our women, just connect, bring everything at home, make it home. So I think that's, the civic engagement part, and I am also very involved with the Democratic Party. I am the member of the Democratic State Committee in 2008, and I was the delegate for Obama in DNC delegate 2012, 2016 for Hillary Clinton, and now I am also the delegate for Vice President Biden. And okay. I was also the first Muslim electoral member of the Massachusetts Electoral College. So that makes, I feel like civic engagement and political both comes together side by side, and we can make some difference, create awareness with the women of South Asian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, in the interest of time, we'll try to keep it quick. Kasturi, I'll come to you directly. You have been a public defender. You have a very different viewpoint of the police because you have seen them on a daily basis at your work. And I know you're a strong advocate of at least working towards defunding the police. So can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Shankar, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm honored to be here. I just want to step back a bit and sort of contextualize what the role of the police historically has been in the United States real quick, because that has informed my decision to be a public defender, to take to the streets in the wake of George Floyd, and also to support the nationwide calls to defund the police. I've worked with a group called Alliance for a Just Philadelphia, a loose coalition of local grassroots organizations that are advocating for defunding, removing resources away from the police departments. So the police were created in this country down south as slave patrols. If a Black slave escaped, they would take the runaway slave and give the slave back to their white owner. And in the North, they were established to crush labor uprisings. And, you know, in the over 200 years now that we've had the police, at their core, their function has remained remarkably similar, and that is to criminalize poverty and to criminalize race. So if you look at the city that I have grown to call home now, Philadelphia, the Public Defender's Office provides criminal defense representation to the indigent. That's what I do. We represent, so 80% of everyone coming through the system cannot afford to pay for their own lawyer. And our office represents the vast majority of them. 92% of those held in our local Philadelphia jails are people of color, 75% are Black. So that's what we're looking at 200 years down the road. The people in there are poor, they're overwhelmingly Black, they're sometimes Latinx, and that's what we have. 1 in 3 Black men in the country today have a felony record, which forever precludes them from sustainable above minimum wage employment, makes them susceptible to housing discrimination. They're not eligible for a whole host of public benefits. In many states, they can never vote. So they're forever kind of relegated to a second-class citizenry, much like slaves were in the days that we think we've left so far behind. And our prison population has exploded, growing 600% between the mid-1960s, right after the Civil Rights Act, and it's not coincidental, the timing of that, to the year 2000. They grew 600%. There's been a slight decrease since then, but what is truly astonishing is that the rate of incarceration really has had very little to do with the actual crime rate, which has halved, more than halved, a little bit more than halved since the early 1990s. Meanwhile, some private companies have profited enormously from, and not just from running the prisons and keeping people in chains. You think of companies like the Geo Group or Core Civic who are running these prisons, but also some of our most favorite companies benefit a lot from prison labor, where they're paying inmates like pennies to the dollar. That is McDonald's, it's JCPenney's, it's Wendy's, it's Starbucks, it's American Airlines, it's Fidelity Investments, it's Victoria's Secrets, it's Verizon, it's Sprint, it's all the companies that we help stay in business. And I think maybe most of you are aware of this statistic by now because it's talked about a lot. The United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population. So we are the leader in being the carceral state. Now, in this moment, we have an opportunity in the wake of George Floyd and this national momentum where we've seen like the largest protest in the history of the United States in the weeks following George Floyd. We have a moment to truly listen to local Black and brown grassroots organizations through the BLM movement, which at its core is asking for us to defund from the police. What it is not asking for is yet more police reform. The thing is that, and Shayok, like I looked at the 10-point accountability plan that you talked about as well. The truth of it is these reforms we have been trying to do for almost 100 years now. The first reform efforts, I believe, began in the 1930s. And when you look at my city, Philadelphia, I mean, we've had a civilian oversight board on and off since the 1950s. It exists right now. One of my friends is on it. We've had implicit bias training for our officers since before 2005. And most significantly, for almost 10 years now, we've had a federal consent decree to monitor the very racist stop and frisk policies that have been ongoing in Philly. In fact, our current mayor came to power on a wave saying he was going to stop and frisk. Of course, that hasn't happened. And almost 10 years down the road, the ACLU reports that in 2019, 71% of all stops were Black, and Black people are 50% more likely to be stopped and searched without reasonable suspicion, which is the legal standard that you need to be able to stop someone. And to be able to frisk someone, you need actual reasonable suspicion that they're armed and dangerous, or that you can obviously see some contraband. Now, you can never obviously see drugs, right? Because they're really small. So all they have to say is that, they thought that the suspect had a weapon. They made some furtive action towards their waistband, and that gets them past any constitutional barriers to the stop and frisk they do. Now, what the ACLU found is that about 1% of the stop and frisks, of which they conducted about 76,000 last year alone in Philadelphia, actually led to the recovery of any weapon. And you as a citizen have very little recourse if you are stopped and frisked. With many of my clients, if they've beaten one of their cases and gone back to the same community and the local beat cops know him, they might be stopping and frisking some of my clients twice, thrice, 4 times in 1 week, until they find some little something to book them and charge them with. And you don't have any recourse to stop this. And oversight and reform has not helped. Let's talk about body cameras. That's the other big call from the reformists today. You know, Philly really stepped up its body camera program in roughly like the last couple of years. About a third of our officers have body cams. And they're taking like tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to make this like whole department wide in the next 2-3 years. The thing is that body camera footage does not change police behavior at all on the ground. I've had one jury trial go where the body camera footage was available, and you can see the officers not just behaving atrociously with my client and another Black man that they randomly stopped and searched and handcuffed for this robbery that had gone down, but they were also being extraordinarily intimidating to the very young teenage like white boy who was the victim in the case. And the jury got to see all of that. And yes, ultimately, after many, many months in prison, my client got to go home, whatever home he had left, right? Because he hadn't been able to make rent or any of that for a number of months. But the truth of it is that less than 2% of all cases ever go to trial. And even less than that actually sees a jury. You know, it's a judge trial mostly. So that is not any kind of justice, and these reforms and these body cameras don't help. And like, heck, like speaking of body cameras, like in the wake of George Floyd, I don't know if some of you saw the national news, but on I-676 at a protest, the police essentially, like 2 SWAT teams came from 2 sides and kettled protesters in on the highway up a steep embankment. So those who couldn't scale a literal like 6-foot wall onto the highway on the other side were dragged down. And there were multiple local news helicopters out there live streaming. So I had, you know, I was at the protest earlier and I'd just gotten home. I was sitting with my housemates watching this on real time on the news. And they not only were dragging people down, beating them up, but after they had handcuffed them, when they were sitting on the side of the highway, they were pulling down their masks and pepper spraying protesters. Every single one of these actions that I just outlined to you, completely illegal, according to the Philly Police's own directives, which you can look up on their website. It's publicly available. Yet it took Mayor Jim Kenney and Commissioner Outlaw a national expose by the New York Times before they apologized for it. So holding police accountable has not worked. More laws, more policy, more training, more body cameras don't work. We have to listen to what local Black and brown grassroots organizations are saying. And they're saying, take the money away from them. If they don't have the money, they cannot do the damage. And let's put the money into the resources that people really need in order to lead the lives they deserve. Put the money into housing, put the money into our schools, put the money into our public transit systems, put the money into our addiction treatment facilities. But for God's sake, let's keep arming these roving death squads, because that is literally what they are. The police in this country kill over 1,000 people a year. You know, it's wonderful that we're talking about George Floyd, but there's like 999 other people that we don't get to hear about. So in this moment, I think we have a very important opportunity to either help BLM or help it get co-opted. So let's not call for more resources for the police. Let's please call for defunding. Thank you.
Thanks. That was very powerful. And I know there is a lot of discussion that will happen. We are just running a little short. I am actually going to short of time. So Natasha, so you always have this job of kind of tying things together, which you do beautifully. I'm coming to you at the end in terms of the panelists is only because you're currently working with voting rights. You have previously worked with reproductive and sexual health of Black women. So you've worn many hats at different organizations. So I want you to tie this all together, everything that has been said together in the context of structural racism, you know, and what is going on or why nothing has been happening and where do we go from there? So if you can just tie this together.
Yeah, I will certainly try my best. Thanks to you and thanks to everyone who is participating and listening in. I'm really honored to follow up on all those amazing panelists. I'm very inspired by all the work that everybody's doing. So I think I'm going to try to take us a little bit of a step back and kind of do a big, broad framework of all of this that we've been talking about. We've heard from varying different perspectives about all the different issues that we're tackling in our various ways, whether it's through theater and art, whether it's through law, whether it's through civic engagement, whether it's through community organizing. All this kind of falls into a broader theoretical framework that I think is really important to name. And it's a word that I think has been tossed around a lot, and that word is intersectionality. So intersectionality is actually a legitimate theoretical and legal framework that was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw is an incredible activist, organizer, lawyer, and professor at Columbia University. And of note, she's a Black woman. So all of her theories and all of her work really stems from her personal identities. So intersectionality as a framework, essentially, it started as a way to really look at the ways in which people move through the world. So for Dr. Crenshaw, she said it's not enough to just look at how people move through the world through one lens, right? You can't just say that I'm impacted by the world because I'm Black, because we all hold more than one identity. And the way that those structures have been set up through mainly the lens of white supremacy, has been to really target our varying identities in different ways. So Dr. Crenshaw says, we need to take a step back and we need to take a step deeper into how we move through the world. So you need to look at how not only how I move through the world as Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw as a Black person, but also as a woman, right? Also through my socioeconomic status. And so over time, that theoretical framework has kind of really been expanded in our discussions as activists, as movement people. So the way I kind of look at it and the way I kind of apply it to my daily life is to look at it as a balancing of privileges and oppressions. So the framework really started talking about the intersections of race, class, and gender, but it's been expanded to talk about things like immigration status, like whether or not you have a disability, what is your gender identity or your sexual orientation, things like that. So as we're doing this balancing of privileges, we all need to first do a deep introspection of the identities that we hold. And then second, a really deep introspection of where we have certain privileges within those identities and where we have oppressions in certain identities. So for example, I'll take myself, right? So I'm a woman of color. So by virtue of the color of my skin, by virtue of my gender identity, I move through the world with certain biases, right? But on the flip side, I do have a lot of privileges. So, one of the panelists talked about how as South Asians, we are an incredibly privileged group of color, right? So we, based on our proximity to whiteness, don't face racism and don't face racial injustice to the same levels and the same degrees as Black folks. I also have incredible educational privilege. I have a law degree, which means that I get access to rooms and spaces and conversations that a lot of other people don't. So what does that actually mean, right? We did this analysis, we understand I have certain privileges, I have certain oppressions. How do I actually tangibly use that? So for me, when I'm in spaces where I recognize I have certain privileges, that's my opportunity to really take a look around me and see who's in the room, who's not in the room, whose voices are not being heard that are critical to really moving forward on certain issues. And because I've been privileged enough to be granted access to those spaces, I then need to turn around and see, how can I bring those other voices into the room? Not just speak on their behalf, but really ensure that their voices are at the table so that they can represent themselves. And the hope is that in the areas in which I experience certain oppressions, people who have privilege in those spaces can do the same for me. So that's kind of just like the broader theoretical framework. And I think each of the panelists has really touched upon ways in which they do it, right? It was incredibly inspiring to hear about how theater groups are bringing all of these incredible directors together to understand different perspectives and share different art forms. So that's a very practical, tangible way of doing this. I also want to touch upon something else, that several of the panelists have mentioned, is that in this particular moment, it's incredibly important to recognize that our voices are not the most important, because we don't face this issue at the same level, to the same degree. We don't have the same consequences as Black communities. So it's really important for us to follow the lead and the expertise of the organizers and the communities on the ground who really face the brunt of these impacts. And so if they're calling for things like defunding and abolishing the police, it's not our job to debate them. It's our job to follow their lead and figure out how we can use our privileges to support them and make that reality. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure many of you have heard this line tossed around. It comes from Fannie Lou Hamer, and several others have said it as well, but we're not free until we're all free. And the crux of that really is understanding which of the components of our lives, which of the components of our skills and our expertises we can use to help folks achieve true liberation. Because right at the end of the day, if we all are able to live our lives freely, express our needs, and work towards achieving sustainable, work towards achieving a world in which we have sustainable access to all of these resources, then we all benefit from it, right? Otherwise, we continue to perpetuate all of these systems that keep us all down in the end. So I think, again, it's really important to build off of something that I think Shayok said. Community organizing is a huge key to making broad-scale systemic change. So I am an attorney. My background is in community organizing. That's kind of how I got into the legal space. So for me, I call myself a movement lawyer. Basically what that means is that anything that I'm doing has to be grounded in community work. I can sit at my laptop, I can look at laws and say, that seems bad, that seems unconstitutional. But at the end of the day, any solution that I come up with by myself will not ultimately help the communities that are impacted. So it's really important to center any work that we do at the broad level, whether it's like advocating for a law, whether it's suing someone, whether it's even like going to your legislature, your representative to talk about a specific issue. Are you grounding that in the perspectives and the essentially the wishes of the people who are impacted? So to tie that to a pretty specific example, I want to talk just super briefly about one of the sets of Supreme Court cases that came down in the past couple of weeks. So I'm not sure if folks are aware of the Title VII cases. So essentially, Title VII includes a set of non-discrimination provisions, which means that people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of their sex in their employment context. So there had been a lawsuit that went all the way up to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not that applied to people based on both their gender orientation and their sexual identity. So the Title VII cases we won, but so much of that wasn't just the people in the courtroom. It wasn't just people who made the arguments. It was this groundswell of support, people protesting in front of the Supreme Court, people having discussions about it, people really having discussions within their communities, and kind of broadly, right? Using community-based activism to change the national landscape allowed us as legal advocates to then make arguments that would have otherwise seemed untenable, right? So all of these tools need to kind of go hand in hand. And then taking it even one more step back to really tie it all together, we need to understand the way white supremacy infiltrates all structures. So I think this particular moment has really been centered around police brutality, which is incredibly important. And it's really, really, really amazing to see people just awakening and tapping into this kind of general national consciousness about police brutality and about issues that particularly impact Black folks. But that's not just the only thing that's happening, and it's not happening in a silo. White supremacy infiltrates all structures, and it infiltrates everything within which we exist. So we need to talk about how people are discriminated against in healthcare, right? We know that rates of maternal mortality are exponentially higher for Black women as compared to all other pregnant people. We know things like environmental racism are real, right? Like if you live in a toxic community, which we know is the case for predominantly people of color, mainly Black people who are living with low incomes, they're not able to parent or have communities or live in safe and sustainable ways. We know that immigration is tainted by white supremacy, right? We see even just this last week in all these conversations around ICE deciding whether or not international students need to be full-time students in order to stay in this country or whether they'll be deported, right? We know that conversations about things like immigration are tainted by race. So as we're thinking about all of these issues, as we're thinking about things like police brutality, we also need to really interrogate the ways in which all of our other institutions continue to prop up these systems. So when we're doing little things, when we're trying to have conversations, we need to really ground ourselves in that. And we need to be aware of the ways in which we personally perpetuate and uphold these systems. So in conversations that we're having, are we leaning towards certain language that continues to benefit us, but actually puts other people down, right? Are we supporting policies that are community-centered and community-based? Are we ourselves trying to really interrogate our own personal biases and make the changes that we need to be better partners and better supports to people who are impacted in different ways? So I'll leave it at that. I could talk about this forever.
No, thank you.
But
because you have led me right into the crux of what I really want to get into at this point, which is what is our responsibility as a community? And as you said, like, you know, we need to look at the broader picture and how can we help the Black and the marginalized community. So I'm actually again going to come to you, Natasha. And you know, what I'm going to do is I'll go through Natasha, Shayok, Kosturi, and Nazda. Think about, within a minute, give us pointers as, you know, when we think about South Asians as individuals or as a community, where can we go from here to move the conversations forward within our community, or help Black people, means going beyond the bullet points that Hassan Minhaj has given us. So, you know, let's, can you give us some pointers? And, you know, let's try to keep it all in a minute or so, so that I can then wrap up with Meena and Dipankar and then hand over to the youth community. There are a lot of youth waiting for their voices to be heard. So Natasha, let's start with you. What would you tell the audience?
Sure. I mean, a few tangible things to do. One is just, we know that there is a lot of anti-Blackness in our communities. That's something that's been particularly discussed, I think, in the wake of this kind of resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in the national discourse. So one of the things that's really important for us to do is to really interrogate that and how we contribute to that. So that goes down to having conversations internally, right? Having conversations with our children, with our parents, with our grandparents, with our communities about how we perpetuate those things, right? Are we talking about Black people in a way that is empowering, that's based on a knowledge of actual people, or are we doing it based off of preconceived notions, off of stereotypes and ideas that are actually harmful? So that's one thing. And that kind of translates into both language you use externally and conversations that you have internally. Then it's to really think about, how do we participate in these systems, right? Are we, do we work for companies that profit off of, like Kosturi said, that profit off of prison labor in our specific environments? Like take, for example, I'm a lawyer, right? And I work on things like briefs and motions and things like that. When I'm very specifically doing that work, what language are we using to talk about communities, right? In our hurry to write the next great brief that's going to strike down a law, are we actually disempowering communities? Are we actually being client-centered? So things like that, really understanding within your own personal scope, within your own personal work, what are the ways in which you can transform your attitudes and your language and your movements essentially to work towards liberation for all.
Thank you. Shayok, I know you talk about empathy, the emotional angle. Why don't you tell us a little bit of where we should go?
Yeah. So I'll just I'll speak to that. I think that as has been alluded to in by a number of other speakers, we have a habit in the South Asian community of distance, of emotional distance from Black folks and folks who are really facing the brunt of racial injustice. And like, I guess I just want us to remember that, you know, a few things, right? One is, like, as Nazda Mashi said, we come from, you know, for the Banlis in the room, we come from Subhash Chandra Bose and Kazi Nazrul Islam and Rabindranath Tagore, right? That's our heritage. We are not, and we also can come from like the zamindars and the bureaucrats who kind of took the role of the go-between for the white master, right? And so we could choose that heritage. There's multiple paths there. And two is remembering our debts to Black people. We often feel a sense as immigrants, and we feel a lot of gratitude toward this country, what it gave us and all those kinds of things. And that's real, right? But oftentimes it's misplaced, I feel, especially because, you know, when we really think about it, it's, you know, we wouldn't even be here, most of us, if the 1965 Immigration Act hadn't happened, that eliminated a lot of the racist immigration quotas that prevented Black and brown people around the world from coming here. Who fought for that? It was Black people. It was the civil rights movement. If it was up to the white leadership at the time, we would never have even gotten a foot here. And so when we think about, again, who is this owed to? Who do we fight for? What side are we on? We have to remember like why we're here in the first place. And then the third thing is I'll say, like, you know, even if it's not enough to just, you know, to fight for this because it's right and because of all those things I just said, we also have to remember that this is the policing of dark-skinned people, of Black people. It does not leave us untouched, right? I mean, Anisha said in the chat, like she talked about Sureshbhai Patel, who was like a Gujarati grandfather who was slammed to the ground and partially paralyzed by 2 cops who got off. And the call was about a skinny Black man, right? And even for myself, you know, in 2018, like I was pulling into my own college at 1 a.m. And a police officer pulled me over and for a broken taillight, and you know, like, luckily I had my college ID, but you know, I checked the car later, and you know, there was no broken taillight at all, and nothing happened to me, right? But the point is that if we don't if we don't create a system where police are, you know, really truly held accountable, who are not having to respond to all these kinds of things that they really shouldn't be responding to. I mean, the criticisms of the defund movement. You know, if we don't eliminate the racial injustice that's there, then we don't end up getting hurt ourselves. But really, it should be. So the main thing is that, again, we have to remember that this is about us. We are brothers and sisters here. This is not about other people, and too often we forget that.
Thanks, Chayok. Those were very powerful. So I'm Kosturi. I'm going to come to you with actually questions that are coming up. So one is, you know, Shovik has asked that there's powerful discussion. You can probably read it on instances of racism and work being done at the grassroots level. How can we raise more awareness? I mean, the racism is vocal among lower income Indian groups and buried among tacit, deadly silence among the well-to-do lot. I mean, obviously, we are part of the enablers on the well-to-do part. So, you know, how can we raise awareness, at least in this segment?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, there is like no easy shortcut to that. Like you can raise awareness through many long, detailed interactions with people. By getting to know them better, it's harder to change minds. It often doesn't happen in one conversation, but if these are the people in your community, then the burden lies with you to do that. And one of the things I would say that we all really need to do is unpack the racism, the casteism, the Islamophobia that lies within each and every one of us, and to have those difficult conversations with our family, with our friends. I mean, like our sort of racist beginnings in this country is really shameworthy. You know, in the early 1920s, there was, I believe, a Bengali person, A.K. Mujumdar, who claimed that he was basically white because of his upper caste Aryan heritage, and because of his caste purity and unbroken lineage, he qualified as a Caucasian. It was him and Bhagat Singh Thind that made these arguments, and so that's like our racist beginnings. And, you know, we have to truly examine why. I think this came out of one of my conversations with Shanko earlier, like why it's okay to have a friend who is Black or Dalit or Muslim, but not okay to marry them. Like I think one of the questions in the chat was like, what can we do with our children to teach them cultural sensitivity? Well, one of the things is you can support them and say that no matter who you're with or what you do, what causes you take up, we are behind you. I'm addressing this more to, I guess, my generation of people in their 40s and 50s, that we're here to learn and to grow with you and to take the lead from you, because those of like the youth here who are, you know, who have grown up here can often like show us the way in that sense. And, you know, to add to what Natasha was saying, like, please just get involved in your local grassroots organizations. Form one if you don't have one that represents South Asians. And you can also sort of grow and learn from other like-minded South Asians if you can build that community. Like for me personally, I've been very lucky to be surrounded by left-leaning Desis, both those who've come here as immigrants and those who are second generation. In Philly, we have a group called the Philadelphia South Asian Collective, and last August, in the midst of Indian Independence Day celebrations by a pretty business-minded group called, I believe, like Council for Indian Organizations, we did a banner drop that said "Stand with Kashmir," and stopped their celebrations for a good, I don't know, like 15 minutes before they understood what they could do to hustle us off the stage. So, you know, we've got to find ways to build solidarity with Black and Latinx communities here, and also try to build solidarity with the Dalit movement in India, with the anti-Islamophobia activists in India as well. So I would just say that.
Okay, I'll come to Hasdapa because, and you know, then we'll try to wrap up. So there was this question about, you know, Jhoom has asked that kindly share names of some local organizations which will help us get involved in raising awareness and help teams become leaders. I mean, Shayab can also respond to that. But Appa, nothing can ever happen without voicing, you know, becoming vocal, becoming involved, and becoming politically more active, or at least taking steps towards that. So please advise us a little bit about how we can move in that direction.
I think first thing I will ask the South Asian community or all immigrant community, please register as a voter. Your movement, your voice will have the polling booth. You know, that's important. This year, 2020 is probably the most important election ever in this country. And I really wanted to see that Chairman Shayok and everyone saying the change, but who will do the change? The policymaker. And we have to select those who will support these agendas. So the election is really important this year, and not even only the national, it's the local election. I mean, state-wise election. If we elect the people who will follow, will agree with our agendas, we should elect them. And that is very important. Voter registration. And actually my foundation, we are doing a free Zoom training, I mean the educational session for how to vote in 2020, because this year—
So please share that with me so that I can share it with—
Yeah, definitely. We are working with the Democratic State Party and us. We will do the 3 sessions about this year is the very complicated. You can do online requests, absentee ballot, then mailing ballot. So people are very confused. So we wanted to give the session that how to vote this year. We don't want to miss any single vote. Every single vote count. So my point is civic engagement for this year. Black Lives Matter, we can agree with all the policy we want to make, elect someone in your community, elect someone from your state, elect someone from the country who will support our agendas, all this discussion. I think that's important, that, you know, voter registration. And even we are, I am already starting the virtual phone bank. I am calling all the Muslims in my town, Western, then we will do the Metro West, then we'll do the New England, and that's how we are working towards Muslim voter so I think everyone, we can participate in that way, just your own family, your own neighborhood, your own community, and that will get the larger population.
Thanks, really. That was pointing us in the right direction as a grassroots, working at the grassroots level. For this main panel, I would like to wrap up by going back to Meena and Dipankar, because we are a theater organization, and right now a question has come up. But before I read the question, there are a few things I want to tell Natasha, Shayok, and Nazda Appa. If you can type up names of some organizations where people can become more involved, because there has been some questions about that, and particularly the youth. If you can tag them up, Jointo can share it on the YouTube link, and then at least people would have access to that. So if you can please do that. So coming back to Meena and Dipankar, so the question is, I'll actually read out the question because it nicely leads to what I want you to talk about, is from Pradeep Mojumdar in in the Virginia area. So he actually has a question about how can we make theater. Okay, so the question is related to how can we make theater that talks about everything that we have discussed today. Because we are a theater organization, tell us the process you're going through. We'd like to see a powerful theater based on the BLM movement and the Brown Silence, which is complicit. So please tell us about the River Souls project that you have been working on. It's fascinating because it is exactly where, as a theater group, we would like to go. Please talk about the journey a little bit. Take a few minutes to talk about the journey. And after that, I'll hand over to Anisha and Shayok to move forward.
Great. So I really appreciate the points that have been made by everybody. And especially, I think I appreciate that pointer that we really should be looking to the civil rights movement. We should all actually educate ourselves about how many of us got here, not all of us, but many of us got here in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. And also really looking at the history of South Asian Americans in this country and what happened with that, the negative comments, but also really the positive things that happened, which is something that we explore in the work that we're doing, River Souls. One thing that we've been exploring lately is that of the Hooghly traders from Calcutta, who are Muslim peddlers who came here in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, and then who had created a huge network of sales over here and then got absorbed into the New Orleans community in Treme, some of whom got absorbed into the New Orleans community in Treme. And it was the Black community that absorbed them, not white. They couldn't marry white women. It actually was the Black community that absorbed many of them. So it's really, I found that very fascinating as we were doing our research for River Souls. And River Souls is a piece that we're engaging in, that Pangea World Theater is engaging in with a friend, Carlton Turner. And it's a process that began with a deep personal relationship between Dipankar, myself, and Carlton, who is from Mississippi and used to be Carlton used to be the executive director of Alternate Roots and is now the director of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. He's African-American, lives in rural Mississippi. And so we've been engaging with him in a series of race conversations right from 2005 around that time. But lately, one of the things that we did was we said we want to create a theater performance together about what it means to have South Asians and African-Americans having a conversation with each other. And as we started talking about the performance, it became this deeply personal story. It's part of a larger project called Race North and South of the Great River. And but River Souls itself is an evening length performance that weaves personal narratives with community stories of identity, faith, culture, family. And one of the things, we chose the embodiment of a river to kind of create this performance because we were north and south of the Mississippi. One of the things that I think you can show the little slide that I sent you about and also, so one of the things that we've done is we've really created story circles and done story circles in Philadelphia, in Dallas, in Minneapolis and Mississippi with South Asians and African Americans, and sometimes the larger community, and really kind of created these circles. And sometimes it was for the first time that people were having such a deep conversation with each other, with South Asians and African Americans, were having such a deep conversation with each other about where they came from, who they were. I mean, it was really amazing actually to have these conversations across race that we've been having for the last so many years. And also one of the things that we did was Carlton, Dipankar, and myself traveled to India. We went to the Ganges. We also went to the Narmada River. We looked at the history of displacement of people around, because of big dams in India. We studied that. We went for a research, basically like a research trip, looking at rituals, and all of that is going to inform our performance that we're going to create, where Dipankar and Carlton are going to act in this performance, and I'm directing the two of them. And really, we're working on a few central questions, like really looking at the power of story to bring us together across diverse cultures and communities without the imposition of assimilation. So that's Carlton Turner, and we visited Medha Patkar in Madhya Pradesh and talked to people whose villages had been drowned because of the big dam that was built. People who've lost their homes, people who've lost the way they're. So really like looking at river as a source. And then we're also looking at how do diverse people of color work to decenter whiteness and colonization as the primary framework for our relationships. And how can we really work with each other? Like how can we critically analyze that? How do we move from transactional relationships to deep relationships between people? And how does the global connectivity of water and lend itself as a metaphor for self-discovery? So we feel like that water, water like people, has an inherent desire to connect to others. So this is a little bit of the project that we're doing. And so I think that it's really looking at connections between the two communities, looking at, so it's important for us to create these kinds of spaces with each other and for these kinds of conversations to emerge. So that's just wanted to so that's something that we're doing, and this work is going to premiere sometime next year.
So one of the things that I wanted to add is Dipankar and Carlton are writing the script, and Meena is editing and directing it. So the actors, it's a two-person play. Dipankar and Carlton are the two actors. So they are writing it. And this is something that I've been talking about in Off Kendrick. We have done a project with Sita where Sitas have written their own work. This is a very beautiful way of actually doing the crossover and actually empathizing and working with the African American community. I just wish we had the ability to do that level of research, Meena, that you have put in, but we will get there. I promise you. You have always been an inspiration.
Thank you.
So there are a lot of things that, Natasha, Shayok are posting out there, and Kasturi also. Kasturi, there has been a question for you. Can you tell a little bit more about this Mazumdar person? Shujoy has asked this. So if you can just post it there, Joyanta will eventually put it on the YouTube chat. So if you can just post the answer. So there was a question about who is this Mazumdar fellow? So with that, I will really hand over to Shayok and Amnesha for the youth section of it. Really, at the end of the day, as a theater group, we live by stories. And Shayok and Bushkun are actually big organizers for the youth section of Voices, which got postponed from March. It will probably happen sometime in the fall. But we really want to hear you out. Your voices, which have a much better connection to what is going on in the ground, is something that I think we need to listen to as a community. So with that, over to Shayok and Amnesha.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll now invite our youth speakers to turn on their video so that when the time comes for you guys to speak, we can see your lovely faces. My name is Amnesha, and I recently graduated high school from Commonwealth School in Boston. For the last few years, I've also been an active volunteer with a nonprofit called Everyday Boston, whose goal is to bridge the gaps between segregated neighborhoods in the city through storytelling. Today, Shayok and I will lead an important conversation about how South Asians fit into the Black Lives Matter movement through the eyes of the youth in our community. So we have invited some of our peers to share their experiences, their perspectives, and their hopes for how South Asians can do better and take responsibility during this critical time. Shayok, if you want to add anything, go ahead.
No, I'm okay. I spoke a lot in the first panel. I want to I want to hand out for you, and I think I'll speak up as needed.
All right, sounds good. So to start us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why I am here today, like moderating this panel. So when Shayok and I were talking on the phone about how this panel would go, he asked me, so like, why are you interested in doing this? And I was like, well, it's important. We should all care. And he's like, well, but why you specifically? And so I thought about it for a few seconds and I said, well, as a South Asian person, I feel like I have a lot of privilege that I can use to create meaningful change. And he said that, yeah, I understand that. And I'm glad that you understand that too. But what specifically about your experience has informed you to realize that? So I thought a little bit longer and I thought back to an experience I had a few years ago when I first started with Everyday Boston. And it was the first day I was volunteering and I walked into the room. And the first thing I noticed was that I was the only South Asian or Asian person in the room. The second thing I noticed was that there were no white people in the room. And the third thing I noticed was that all the teenagers in the room were Black Muslims, or Hispanic. And for some reason, my gut feeling was to feel really uncomfortable. For some reason, I didn't feel like I belonged in this room. And when I thought that, when I had that feeling, I had to ask myself, wait, why do I exactly feel this way? I'm also a person of color, but I also feel like an outsider. And that question got me thinking about, what does it mean for me to be South Asian in America and in this community among other minority groups? And that was when I started asking the questions that hopefully we can talk about more today, and we'll have other youth speakers talk about. So let's just jump right into this. We'll first be talking about anti-Black racism and stereotypes within the South Asian community that, even though we might not always realize it, are counterproductive to the BLM movement. So Shayok and I will call on our speakers, and then if any of our youth speakers want to respond, react, or add to what they've heard from our peers, they can use the raised hand feature in Zoom and I'll call on you. And if anyone in the audience has any questions, please write them down in the YouTube chat. So first, we will start with Ayan Chaudhary from Andover.
Did I have to raise my hand? Or no?
No, you're good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ayan Chaudhary from Andover. I'm 19. I'm going to be a sophomore at Northeastern. And so about this question about, or this topic of like anti-Black racism and stereotyping in the South Asian community, I think it's been a pretty prevalent, but like pretty massively ignored issue for decades. So many of us have grown up with our parents telling us things like, you know, like don't go in the sun for too long, you don't want to get dark. Like they believed that having dark skin was inferior to having light skin in some way. And we've grown up hearing that Black communities are dangerous and we have to stay away from them at all costs. Don't walk there at night. Don't, like, driving around there is uncomfortable. And I mean, while it's not technically wrong to say that urban communities have higher levels of crime, we're never really told about the systemic racism that causes the over-policing and underfunding of these areas to be labeled as so-called dangerous. And we've grown up hearing about Black people are inherently lazy, they've been discouraged, and I don't know about, I can't speak about other Black youths, or not Black youth, South Asian youths, but like my parents have like discouraged me or indirectly discouraged me from dating people who are Black for just absolutely no reason. Now, many South Asians do agree on the fundamental truth that Black lives matter and that racism exists. But however, too often we see statements like, I agree with the peaceful protests, but the rioting and looting, I just can't get behind and they're inexcusable. Or the cops who killed George Floyd are just bad apples, but not all cops are bad. Or what about Black or on Black crime? And these are points that are made, I think, just to change the narrative or to distract from to making actual substantive change. Ask yourself, why are you changing the narrative? Not only are those statements wrong, or at least can be proven wrong based on historical evidence and statistics, but I just think that they're completely unnecessary to bring up during a time where it is abundantly clear that change needs to be made. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ayan. If anyone has anything to add to that, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we will go on to our next speaker. Okay. So, okay, Arnav, yeah, add to that.
Hi, yeah, I just really wanted to quickly add before I forgot the the strange dynamic of where I agree with the statement that I just made, that Black Lives Matter as a statement has been something that South Asians can generally get behind, but in a sort of passive way. And then when it comes to sort of more active engagement is where the conversation almost invariably shifts to rioting and looting. And I think it may have a sort of odd cultural cross effect with the fact that, at least in my experience, South Asian culture is very heavily based on respect and understanding elders' wishes and so on. And in the context of being South Asian in America, this tends to reflect through in statements such as rioting and looting is bad, and the statement that most police are good and you should obey the police, which are both reductive and, as Ian said, distracting from the point. But yeah, that's all I had to add.
Thank you, Arnav. Anyone else have anything? Okay. Now I'll go on to Aisha and Niharika Ghosh, who are our next speakers.
Hi, I'm Aisha. I'm 15. I'm going to be a sophomore.
And I'm Niharika, and I'm 17. And I'm going to be a senior in high school.
So we come from a family that has typically been pretty, you know, we like to stay like educated on everything, and you know, we're encouraged to read the news and get like all the perspectives and hear everything. And you know, I'd say that our grandparents' stuff might not be as traditional, so that direct like don't date Black people or stuff like that, I feel is not as prominent in our family. But we've definitely still experienced the at least colorism directly, because you know, we also feel, even if it hasn't been told to us, we just like inherently feel like tanning is bad, like we should try to not do too much of it. And like when we visited India, one of the women that works at our house, like I remember being like 7 and she was like, oh, like you're so pretty, you're so fair, and I'm so dark, like I'm not as pretty. And like at the time you maybe don't understand how that could be harmful like for yourself, but then like looking back at it, when like that, you know, it like affects your mindset. So no matter how vocal that I could be now that, you know, Black Lives Matter and like, you know, all skin colors are, you know, should be respected and everything, if in the back of our mind like darker is bad, is, you know, how could that transfer, you know, when you're like thinking about it. So yeah, that's definitely affected me in that way. So
yeah, I agree. And growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, for some reason, like we've always felt that like being darker makes us stand out, and like we would want to be like fairer so that we can fit in. And I feel like this type of mindset is really just like, it's only supporting or encouraging this type of colorism and kind of indirect like racism or stereotyping, because we inherently feel that being darker is a bad thing. And that's something that we need to combat like at its root, because it affects us, not even like sometimes not even relating to the Black Lives Matter, but way before this became a movement, it's affected us for years, like just how predominant colorism is in South Asian culture. And yeah, we've always felt that like sorry, that like colorism does affect us, and we need to speak up more about it, because that's the root of where we can start making change, at least in our culture and our family.
Thank you so much, guys. Does anyone have anything to add about just anti-Black racism in our community, or stereotypes that are harmful and that you may notice within the South Asian community? Does anyone want to say anything else about that? I wanted to add really quickly that the things that we mentioned, like colorism and just the harmful stereotypes, it doesn't even need to be like a full conversation or a full like argument that has to be had. Even passively, when our parents or our grandparents or family friends say things, maybe not even to you, but just like, oh, that girl's so much prettier because she's light-skinned, or oh, that girl is not that pretty because she's like dark-skinned, for colorism. And just like stereotypes that have been used in passing or very passively, conscious fact that we view ourselves and the world around us. And so I think a question that was asked in the chat is like, how do we raise our kids to be more culturally sensitive? It's to really be careful about your words, because they can have a much larger impact than the way you think. Even from a young age, if you say these things subtly or make these subtle comments, they really affect how we see ourselves and how we see other people. And that's important to watch, as Ayan, Arnav, and Aisha and Niharika mentioned. So yeah, now we'll move to our next point. Shayok, do you want to give a brief introduction of that?
Sure. Oh, I'm unmuted. Yeah. So our next question is sort of about the South Asian community's relationship with activism and with and also in terms of professions as well. And we often find that, like, a lot of us, we're kind of told not to stay away from going out to the march. Don't get involved with politics. Don't do organizing work, or be the civil rights lawyer, or be in a certain sort of path, doctor, engineer, sort of prestigious and safe careers, right? So we kind of value security. And I'll turn it over to Gurjot Kohli, who's he's actually a friend of mine from LA. He'll talk a little bit more about himself. How do you feel what do you feel about that dynamic in the South Asian community? How do you see it play out, and what do you feel it should change?
Thanks, Jayok, for passing it over. Yes, as he said, my name is Gurjot Kohli. I'm in LA. I'm 22, and I'm going to be starting a job as a water resources engineer for a stormwater consulting company. I think the point that I wanted to mention is that I feel like a lot of South Asian youth, especially at the high school level, I know I was definitely guilty of this. Kind of see that going into the sciences and going into engineering and going into these different very technically skilled fields have to be independent from justice, or they have to work towards, or they really focus more on technical proficiency as opposed to developing something that will benefit communities around. That's primarily the reason why I went into civil and environmental engineering. I thought that it was the most tangible way to make change within our communities. I think that the cool thing about it is that, so much of history is shaped by the edifices and the actual, physical infrastructure that makes our societies what they are. So it's really impactful to, when you're making these systems that stay for so long, roadways and buildings and utilities and all these different factors, to make sure that when you create these designs, they're very, very cognizant of the communities that they're situated within. So, there was a recent op-ed, I don't know if anybody's checked it out, but actually about LA in the LA Times, and how, our freeways are actually the biggest racist monument in our city, because, they were developed using really just paving over and, pretty much obliterating communities and separating communities to build these huge freeways that really guide our travel and transportation today. So going into civil engineering, I wanted to focus on how I can renovate that, or how I can try to make a difference in that space. So in my position, as an engineer, I work on redeveloping parks in various neighborhoods, from ones that are advantaged to ones that are disadvantaged, by designing these like low impact development projects that takes stormwater that flows down our storm drains or down the LA River, and pretty much cleaning that to create a new budget for us to use in LA. Because as a lot of you may know, LA doesn't really have the best rep in terms of getting our own local water. So the idea is to really, but the cool thing about this is that we get to speak with people in the community and see what they would want to see, right? So, and what I've noticed personally is that in disadvantaged communities pre-COVID, there's a real stress and there's a real emphasis for making sure that parks aren't disrupted from their normal operations, because there are so many students and so many youth who actually depend on local programs in order to advance themselves, better themselves, or kind of just stay away from harmful effects. So it was really interesting to, go in and say, hey, we would like to tear up your park, but we have 15% of this budget with Measure W, which is a state bond that focuses on safe and clean water. To basically, we have 15% to really accommodate you and provide the space to see what changes you would like to see in your park. And people really, really respond to that. So we've gotten suggestions on how there haven't been enough water fountains or there haven't been enough handicap access ramps that we didn't even consider in our design. So it's cool to see that, we're making lasting changes to parks that are kind of in dilapidated condition. And that's just one way I do it. There's so many different ways to contribute. As mechanical engineers are in Africa developing these really cool catapult drone systems to deliver medicine to people who in communities that are very remote in those areas. Data scientists and software people can really work on updating police department records and stuff like that, because speaking or hearing Philippa Tibagoff speak from Center of Policing Equity, the systems that they use to really categorize people and organize their data are really, really behind. So I think there's a lot of effort that can be done, just to kind of cut myself short, to work on justice issues from the engineering perspective. I think that it really takes any kind of skill, any kind of work, and any kind of focus that you can do to work on these anti-Black issues and tackling systemic racism in any capacity you really can. So that's all I got to say on the matter.
Thank you so much, Gurjot. That was really insightful. Does anyone want to talk about what they think about that, or if they want to add anything? Just raise your hand in Zoom if you want to. Okay. We'll next go to Ritahan Mukhopadhyay for what he thinks about this issue, this part of the issue.
Hi. I think I raised my hand just to add on to what Tita said. And I just want to say like a quick point that I think an important, I guess, idea I took from what Gurjot just said is the concept that businesses and I guess companies, entrepreneurs, as they're establishing their business or whatnot, that they should be more tied to their stakeholders as opposed to their shareholders. So traditionally, you want to be tied to the people that impact, I guess, your bottom line, the people that you have financial ties to, but it's important to understand that you also have to consider the people that aren't giving you money or I guess directly providing you financial incentives, but people that are still going to be affected from whatever project or plan you have. So in the example that Gurjot brought up, that the highways in LA sort of I guess split apart communities. These communities weren't, I guess, asked or considered for their opinion when a project like this happened. So it's, I guess, just that idea that paying attention to the people that may not be necessarily giving you money, but are being affected by the actions your business, your organization or whatnot is going to take is, I guess, is just an important idea to bring home.
Thank you. Yeah, Ian, I see your hands raised.
So I kind of want to tie this a little bit more to like on a personal level, like why I personally really care about this or why I started to care about this, because I mean, for me, I don't know, I can't really speak on anyone else in this panel or anyone else because for me personally, like I'm a big fan of, like hip hop and rap music, and I'm also a big fan of sports that are, primarily played by African-American athletes like football, basketball, etc. So in terms of like Black culture, I think I've been I've been like always appreciative and always involved in this culture. ever since I was little. Like I've liked football, basketball since I was like 5, 4, and etc. So the fact that I'm really immersed in this culture, but I stay silent, like I can't stay, so I mean, it would be hypocritical for me to stay silent when, you know, these lives that are contributing to this culture that I so like endear and so something that I really enjoy, if these lives are being oppressed, these lives are being, there's injustices that have to do against these this community, it would be hypocritical of me to stay silent. So as a result, you know, I took action after watching the George Floyd video, of watching him, like the Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd, and I just had enough, and I decided I really needed to take action. So as a result, I started educating myself. I started, you know, reading articles, watching movies, watching documentaries, and I tried, you know, passing that information on to my mom, to my parents, to my family, trying to get them involved as well. And I mean, it's hard for me to really call anyone out in this Zoom session or whoever's watching, because everyone who's watching, or at least the vast majority, obviously cares and obviously is doing their part just by being here. But at the same time, I see when I, you know, spread this information to my mom's doing a great job. She's, you know, reading, listening, caring, but she in turn passing it on to other South Asian, like her friends or whatever. And there's really not much of a chain reaction. It kind of really stops where my mom stops there, and it doesn't really progress. And that's kind of where, you know, it bothers me to a point where you have a little bit of action going on, but you just don't have enough for it to really truly make a substantive impact on our community. You know, you see on Facebook people or wherever, people posting about like their new recipes they tried out, or their new their like social gatherings that they just did. You see these posts, so you always know that there's some time out of their day they're taking out to, you know, learn these new recipes, have these social gatherings. So if that time, at least a fraction of that time, was kind of, you know, dedicated to learning about these injustices, learning about what our community can do, you know, as Rita Han had mentioned and Gujrot had mentioned, talking about businesses and stakeholders and shareholders. If you're an owner of a business, or if you're in a position to do that, to actually, you know, care about your shareholders instead of stakeholders. Even if you're not, like, you can just email, I'm sure this has already been said, but emailing representatives, you know, if you're a teacher, be part of the curriculum change to educate students about racial injustices. If you're a doctor, you could offer like free or reduced medical assistance to people of color who would otherwise be crushed by like hugely expensive medical bills. Getting your news from outside of traditional media outlets like Fox News or CNN or ABC or whatever. It's extremely saddening, I think, how much the South Asian community fails to care about these issues outside of their own sheltered lives. And I really think the time to act is now. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Ayan. That was really well said. Thank you. Does anyone want to add to that? I know, Arnav, you wanted to say something for this part as well. So does anyone else want to say anything? Just raise your hand.
I also have like a follow-up question, like just building off of this theme, like on how we talk about this in the South Asian community, and like to our parents, to our friends, and you know, have any of you had any conversations where you've had, you know, with someone close, you know, in the South Asian community, whether you're family or not, where like you said something that really resonated about this, or they said something that really resonated with you, that like we can use as we talk about like, okay, how are we actually making this, how are we communicating this, like how are we actually getting it to the place where people are going to be understanding what the role we need to take, and like, for example, like I'll say for myself, my parents are pretty like supportive about this this stuff in general, but like my mom, I mean, she mentioned two things that she felt resonate with her. One was the piece about like our heritage as Banalis, and you know, and it's there for Punjabis, it's there for Keralites, anyone in South Asia. You have a heritage of fighting back against this kind of thing, and it's like calling back to that in a sense. And Gurjot, I know you had some thoughts you shared with me about Sikhi, and also the other piece of just realizing that we're not outside the racial system, like, and we came here because Black people allowed us to come here, or fought for us to those quotas to be gone. Like, those are a couple things that I found useful that I mentioned earlier in the panel. I wonder what else you guys have had in terms of conversations.
Yeah, Arnav.
Just really quick, that phrase reminded me of something. I forget exactly who I had this conversation with. It was someone within the South Asian community, but I remember thinking about the effects, the differences and similarities of colorism within the South Asian community and colorism within the United States as a whole. And I remember hearing the phrase that like an obvious reason why South Asians should be more active in the fight for like Black and Latinx communities is that while we might not suffer in the exact same ways, we suffer for the same reasons. Like the specific phrase was like, it doesn't make sense to hold these standards within our communities because we also have larger noses and are dark and have brown hair and brown eyes. And those similarities with the Black community, both in the States and abroad, should, aside from the basic decency of doing the right thing, it makes sense to take down the systems of colorism and white supremacy in general that subjugate all non-white people in the same way, albeit not in the same magnitudes. But yeah, it was that phrase in particular.
Thank you, Arnav. Anyone else want to add to Shayok's question or just a follow-up to it? Yeah, Aisha.
Well, this is like not really with my friends or like Indian friends and stuff, which I know you were like addressing, but just like conversations that I've had in my family, because I feel like I started getting interested in this kind of topic like younger than other people, or other people like in my like town and stuff, because I remember like in like early middle school, like I started watching a lot of documentaries about just like, it started off with like trafficking and like drug abuse and stuff, and I kept noticing that, these, like, I'm not really seeing white people in these, like, this is people of color, and like these problems are mostly affecting them. And then my like really close friend, her mom worked at a prison, like educating prisoners and like helping them, when they leave. And so I was like really interested in that, and I thought, what she was doing was really cool. And then she, invited me to, I think I was in 7th grade, and she invited me to go to this event. And it was like a prison community, like, I don't know how to describe it. It was like just like a connecting them. And they had all these speakers that were like ex-prisoners or, people that had been through the system, and they were talking about it. And then I think that was like the major like moment for me. That was like, okay, I think that I really want to do this. And then I've been really interested in like public policy and social justice and like careers in that field. And I've, mentioned that to my family and to my parents. And then a lot of times that's responded with like, oh, you don't want to do that because you're not going to make money and you're just going to get depressed and all this stuff. And then that's like, it's just, I haven't really like comprehended all of that yet. But I think that also could just be like, another form of just passively putting that down and being like, oh, like, it's just too much trouble to, work in those communities. And like, but I think that ending that like mindset and kind of being like, no, like, we can put effort even if it doesn't, directly affect us. Like, these are our people, and this is our future. So I think that, I don't know if anyone else has experienced it like in their families, but going into that career, just being super interested in that, if that's like looked down upon, like, I don't know if that's normal. But yeah, like, I've had that, those conversations, and it's definitely like an uncomfortable kind of weird thing that you have to think about, like, if your parents are like, no, like, don't do it. So yeah, that's like my experience with that.
Thank you so much for sharing. I don't think you're alone there, Aisha. Like, I think a lot of people have experienced that with their family it's not like an immediate rejection. Try to steer, like the whole idea of steering us kids towards lawyers, doctors, engineers, all traditionally stable jobs, like that idea, and steering us away from the jobs that you had mentioned, I think is something that is subconsciously done by our parents, or maybe not everyone, but a lot of people in the South Asian community. And maybe it's out of fear for, like, you don't want to be poor or depressed. Like, those are obviously, you don't want your kids to have that. But even if that is your fear, it doesn't make it less important to go, like, to do that work. And as a parent, I think it's important to understand that if your kids want to go into that, if we want to go into that, if we are passionate about it, we can make change in that. And we can be successful if that's what we want to do. And I think it's important to support that in any way that you can. So I think that is definitely an important point that you brought up, Aisha. Thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else want to add their experience or just what they think about how South Asian culture either tangibly or intangibly kind of is counterproductive towards activism culture, activism in general, or social justice? Yeah, Gurjo.
Yeah, kind of mentioning what Shayok said. I talked to him quite at length about my experience with, my religion of Sikhism, and, kind of what me and a lot of my fellow like first gen friends have experienced. And, you know, um, I think that, it's funny that that my heritage, and I'm sure the heritage of a lot of other people on this, panel, uh, feel that, there is a real message, at least for me in Sikhi, of defending the defenseless and really working for, um, fighting for social justice, fighting for people that don't have their ability, using your privilege to really go out there and help others to the best of your ability. But I think there is that dichotomy there between, how parents really want us to go in and do these jobs that are high earning and do a lot, bring a good amount of praise, makes the family happy, and makes everybody very comfortable. But there's also like that denial once you go into that comfort zone of, a core identity, or like what you identify yourself as, or there's at least this cognitive dissonance between saying I am, a Sikh person in my case, and I care about all these issues, but I'm not really doing anything about it. But my forefathers did, so that's good enough. Like it's this weird way of kind of passing the buck back to our ancestors, but not really carrying their message forward. So I was talking to Shayak about this poem that I saw that I really love, and it's about like the founder of Sikhism, Guru Nanak, and it's about how there's this real difference and discord between what he actually did versus how we depict him in our houses, and how you know the paintings that we put up in our homes are very like illustrious and luxurious and beautiful of what he looks like, as opposed to what history tells us he actually did. So he looks, he has rosy cheeks, and he has these really, and he has like the most calming presence of just enlightenment and comfort and peace just flowing out of him. But in reality, the true picture of Nanak was that he was someone who actually fought against or was a big proponent of nonconformism. He was someone that stood in the face of religious idolism for the Sikh community, and was someone who really tried to overthrow the idea of having to maintain family status or family quo if the concept was really was didn't really make sense, or in the justice issue wasn't there, or all these different things, basically just really being an activist. But in our homes, we kind of show that we don't really want that just by having another picture of him that doesn't have cracked heels, or that doesn't have you know his beard swept in by turbulent winds and stuff like that. It's kind of a very specific example, but I feel like it kind of targets that discord that I have, or that dichotomy that I feel in terms of, I want to be able to contribute to helping others and, defending the defenseless is leveraging my privilege to help people who don't have that privilege themselves, kind of like what Natasha was talking about earlier in the panel. So that's been my experience personally, and I open it up to other folks if they want to connect this experience with their heritage too.
Yeah. No, yeah. Sorry, real quick. I just that really resonates with me, Gurjot, because we have, I mean, a lot of Bengalis on the call. Who's our guy, right? Is Rabindranath Tagore, who is also this like very, he's got his beard and he's up there, he's a sage, and we don't talk about the fact that like after the massacre at Amritsar at Jallianwala Bagh, where these British soldiers killed hundreds of people for peacefully gathering, he renounced his knighthood. He was a protester himself in terms of, and that aspect of him, it's often sanitized and left out, right? He's just like the big poet, and that's nice. But we forget those aspects of our heritage, and like just kind of closer. We're in the suburban home, and we're just kind of here and not looking outward at like what we can be, like the greatness of what we can be. So that really that just resonated with me. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Shayok. I think we should probably move to our last and final point if you want to introduce that, Shayok, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah. So I think this is sort of a good segue to our final point. And when me and Onesha were having the initial conversations, we talked about where South Asians fit into all of this, because we're a new community in a lot of ways, right? A lot of us, our parents came the 80s, maybe there's one or two generations before that. And so in some ways we're still naive about where we are in terms of race in America, and we don't know, like we don't, the way we talk, at least in our internal community, we often don't talk about that. But we have this strange place where we're brown, we're immigrants, but we're also in, oftentimes privileged positions. So where does that place us in the racial system of America, and what are the responsibilities that come with that, if any? So, Onesha, I'm not sure who's the next.
Yeah, actually, I wanna, Ritahan, you wanted to say something quickly about the second point. So sorry for missing you on that. Just go ahead and say that, and then we'll move to Aisha and Niharika for the last point.
Yeah, no problem. So what I want to say, going back to activism. So at school, I'm a part of a student organization about environmental concerns. And the organization has also done collaborative work with other student activist groups, like the Black Students Revolution, on a campaign to help a local neighborhood damaged by environmental racism. And there is a significant population of students on campus of South Asian origin, a higher proportion than I would imagine at most universities. Yet the number of people I've seen of South Asian descent at these events across various activist groups has been far less than I would say their proportion of the student population. So I guess the question is, why aren't there more young South Asians involved? And I think many South Asians nowadays are, young South Asians that is, are at least on a surface level sympathetic towards the causes that these groups represent. And while this does not dismiss the subtle forms of racism that they may perpetuate, as others have referred to, I think many of them don't need to be argued with or convinced per se to agree with the ideals these activist groups stand for. So I guess, that still leaves a question, why don't you see them out, in many of these activist organizations? And I think it comes down to the fact that many of them, or since that they don't experience and feel the same struggles that the Black community or other communities do, they don't feel as initiated or motivated to fight. And it's not to say that they don't experience struggles, but it is certainly different from what other communities do, especially if they're already coming from a place of economic privilege. So they may understand that standing up in a sincere way is the right thing to do. They may lack the inner sense of conviction or the idea that they've made it personal and have a personal initiative to seek justice. And this lack of personal conviction is what needs to change, which sort of brings me to the importance of solidarity. So it's important to not forget that, yes, the struggles we face are different and that should be acknowledged, but we're all still under the universal notion of struggle, and our collective struggle will not go away until everyone's does. So, which is why we must never forget about solidarity. mutually sticking up for each other's struggles fosters the sense of community and gives each individual cause bigger numbers that can overwhelm the power of the oppressing structures. So as I've said, the activist groups at my school look out for each other, whether it's helping with each other with events or initiatives, or even just like signing letters or statements issued by each other. So if you look at some of the statements issued by the Black activist groups on campus in the past couple of weeks, you'll see signatories from groups representing justice in Palestine, Muslim rights, Jewish voices, the Graduate Students Union, Asian and Pacific coalitions, groups standing up for immigrant rights, disability rights, indigenous rights, LGBTQ, women's rights, anti-capitalistic and anti-imperialistic initiatives, and of course, environmental activists, and many more. I could go on. But anyway, I guess sort of the final point I have is how can the South Asian youth get involved? And obviously there's the option of attending and actively partaking in protests that make your voice heard loud and clear, protests that evoke the sense of urgency or response from who or what you're protesting against. There's writing and calling your local legislators, as many have said. And now, not to denounce voting or instill a sense of failure in electoralism, voter disenfranchisement, especially towards people of color, is still a huge issue. But it's important to understand that a lot of dramatic change in this country and around the world has come from these protests, these riots, and people making their voices heard directly and making the oppressive ruling class or organizations feel uncomfortable. So sure, you should still vote, and voting is important, but you should understand that it's more like a minimum than the expectation. And additionally, I would add, there's the option of joining activist groups in your community, helping them organize, and plan at whatever level you can help. And the final thing I'll say is that participating in mutual aid is also another good form of activism that's sort of feasible for people in all walks of life. So, while charity and donating is fine, mutual aid breaks the vertical structure of giving into a horizontal one. And while charity aims at fighting the symptoms of struggle, mutual aid is more about fighting the cause of such struggles. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Ritahan. That was really well said. And I think it had a lot of good content and material for everyone to hear. And now I think we'll go to Aisha and Niharika for your point.
Yeah, so as Shayak mentioned, South Asians are kind of part of this model minority group, and this creates almost like an expectation for us to, of course, stay educated, but also be like proper and kind of take that place in society. So when we've like talked about Black Lives Matter and the movement and these type of things with our parents or our family, we kind of get, as was mentioned before, this type of passive support, and oftentimes we'll hear like, don't get political, or like if it's controversial, like too much reading into this is just gonna bum you out and negatively affect you. And this kind of mindset, it really just continues to promote ignorance about the cause in the South Asian community, and just continues this passive mindset that we're so privileged, like we have everything going for us, like why would we get involved in these controversial matters? Like, yes, we support it, but we won't actively support it. And I feel like we felt that with our family or our community, that we want to be really involved, but like there's still this hesitation that like we're kind of on the outside and we don't really experience it, so like how can we have a say in it? And even though that is true on one part, like we kind of live in this bubble and like a really privileged living condition, so we don't experience it on a daily basis, and this kind of leads the people around us to almost deny it and pretend like it's not actually going on. And I feel like this kind of mindset, this mental barrier needs to be broken down so that we can participate just as actively, even if it may be like a controversial issue. Like it's not about like just like Black Lives Matter. This is a humanitarian issue that everyone should be strongly supporting. So yeah. That's good.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I think we shall go to Arnav for his point on this.
So when I was thinking about like the racial system in the United States and how South Asians fit into it, my thoughts kind of drifted to a job that I had a few years ago. I was working at a small bakery in my hometown, which is very, very white. I used to joke that they could count the number of black or brown folk on one hand, including myself. And so this bakery was run by a man from Senegal. His name was Mamadou. And there were only 2 employees, myself and a Colombian guy who knew 3 words in English, which were brown, telephone, and bread. And I often wondered what it would be like to experience their communities, because during the course of a workday there, we would speak in Spanish the entire time. My Colombian friend Alberto, because he didn't speak any English, he would speak Spanish. Mamadou, who was born in Senegal, trained in France, and lived in Spain before coming to the United States, spoke French, Spanish, Wolof, which is the native language of Senegal, and English. And when I was behind the counter, oftentimes I'd yell to the back in Spanish, and customers would think that I was Hispanic. And it just became a running joke for me. And then later in life, I considered what my life would have been like if I was Spanish, or if I was Latinx, more specifically. Because as Sharik mentioned earlier, that the Immigration Act of 65, which could only pass because of Martin Luther King's work in 64, allowed my parents and probably the parents of some of the other people in this chat to come to the United States later. And I was thinking about the varying but similar histories of racial oppression for Latinx folks in the United States and Black folks in the United States. I know that Mamadou himself probably had a hard time taking out a loan to start that bakery because he has a non-white sounding name, which is a very storied pattern that occurs with lots of small Black business owners. And I know that Alberto, the man that I worked with, he had a really tough time traveling back and forth between Colombia and the United States, and especially trying to support his family overseas. And something that I've been thinking about within the context of that story and the context of the South Asian community in general is that our community is, as minority communities in the United States go, we are relatively closed off, at least in my personal experience. There is now a small South Asian community in my hometown, but we have never run for any public office here. The amount of representation for South Asians in almost any form of like visible media, whether it be running for office or media and movies and TVs and authors or news personalities, whatever it might be, is very small. I think because of a cultural notion we've developed of that it's somehow better to sort of stay quiet, fly under the radar, accept the sort of model minority status we've been given, even though that status only occurred because higher class, higher paying job immigrants were allowed in. That's a whole other issue. But because we've been given this small fraction of status, this model minority status, we've, at least in my experience, not been as outspoken and formed a sort of cultural or community identity the same way that Black or Latinx communities in the United States have. Because I know that Mamadou is known as one of the best Black businesses in my hometown and the surrounding areas. And Alberto is, he was a very, very talented painter, and he painted these murals in the store that depicted life in Colombia and his personal life as a Latinx person. And I found, again, in my experience, that the South Asian community, the Indian community, the Bengali community hasn't been as outspoken as we could be about confronting both where we are in this racial hierarchy and what we can do to change it. Yeah, that's my piece.
Thank you so much, Arnav. That was really well said. Thank you.
I accidentally stopped my video and not my audio.
All good. Now we'll go to Ian. Yeah, you have your hand raised, and you also had something to say, I believe, on this point. So you have the floor.
Yeah, a lot of what I had to say was already said, you know, in terms of the model minority myth that's been covered extensively throughout this whole program, I guess. But I just wanted to quickly point out the fact that I think, at least from my own personal experience, people haven't heard of the model minority myth, or who don't really, believe in it. They believe in sort of a notion that, like, we came to this country with not much at all. And I'm not at all discrediting the fact that, like, Asian or South Asians have come to this country, like, and have worked their way up and et cetera. Like, I'm not at all discrediting the fact that it took a lot of hard work, took a lot of drive, took a lot of resolve to, be to where they are currently. But the fact that a lot of South Asians have gone through that struggle, or gone through that, they automatically think that just because we did it, anyone else can, and the African American community can as well. They fail to acknowledge the fact that the South Asian community is kind of it's built, or even though they maybe didn't really have like these resources or a ton of money coming in to the country or whatnot, they were given a strong education when they were in India. You had a strong family support system. You had strong familial values. And a lot of the time you see in urban communities where you have a single mother home, where you have to start working in order to provide for yourself and in order to make ends meet. And I don't know a lot of the time in India if that's the case, but at least I feel like that's kind of not really acknowledged, that you even though don't have that, like, you didn't maybe come with a lot of money, but you still had a lot of these important background structures in your life that like enabled you in a sense to rise to where you are, where the African American community may not have that. So I just think it's important to kind of detract and dismantle this notion of we did it, so can they, because it's really unfair to compare these histories, compare these upbringings for these two different communities, because they're vastly different and they're incomparable. So I just wanted to talk on that a little bit.
Thank you so much, Ayan. Thank you. So we've gone through all of the speakers that we've kind of had predetermined. So now I'm opening up the floor to any of our youth speakers to talk about any reactions, responses, or just anything that they want to add or thought about in the process. So yeah, does anyone have anything they want to add? Rita Hun. I think Rita Hun's hand's raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi. I think something Arnav kind of reminded me of in both of his talks is, I think this isn't true, I'd say, for like maybe the majority of the community, but certainly for some like some significant portion, I would say, is that with a lot of these first generation immigrants, I wouldn't even say like not even limited to just the South Asian community, but just first generation immigrants in general, when they first come to the country with a job or whatnot, there's a sense that, if they speak up or, I guess challenge the status quo, there's a risk that they'll lose their livelihoods for whatever reason, which obviously, that's a pretty big deterrent from doing so. So with that idea, they kind of try to instill it in their children, that you should just, don't challenge the status quo, just, get a good paying job, make your money, stay low, and, you'll be okay. And obviously, it's not for me to say how much you're worried about your own personal, I guess, or the risk you think you have of losing your job or, whatever consequence from speaking out. But I think it's also important to sort of, for these people who, I guess, fall under this category, to take, I guess, a hard look at your, I don't know how to say it, economic privilege at this point. Maybe you've been in the country for 10, 15 years, that your children at least should be able to, have this chance to speak up and, make change without, the risk of them, I guess, sort of losing it all at this point, I guess, in time. So, obviously I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think it's an idea that should be looked at for, I guess, people who fall under this category. Yeah.
That's definitely an important reminder. And I think that is a central point to why it's not talked about in the South Asian community or why we're starting now. So with that, unless there's any other final pieces, I think we'll close out.
Shayok wanted to say
Yeah.
something before.
Yeah, I can't. I was also, I think, I don't know if Meda got a chance to speak. I don't know if Meda wants to say something. If not, yeah, I can say what I was going to say. Okay.
Oh no, yeah, my points were just all like said by everyone, and yeah, like I agree with everything that was said. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for coming, Meda.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
No, yeah, but it's also, oh sorry, it's also
Go ahead.
important for like the people in like the older generations to like really understand like where we're coming from, because like their times are different, our times are different, and like it's like different experiencing like colorism and racism here than it is in like India and stuff. So it is like important for them to like understand like what changes can be made for the future. So yeah.
Thank you, Meda.
And I'll just say really quick, I think also like it's been, as I've been myself like trying to figure out what my role is in all this personally, like it's been good for me to even reflect on like, I mean, we're talking about a lot of stuff that's happening in this community. And some of the conversation is about other people and how other people are not, doing what they need to be doing. And it's also about like the realizations that we may have come to now. We've come to them after some time, and it's been good for me to even just to reflect on like, what was I doing before? I'll just say the story I have in mind. Like growing up in the community where we have a certain feeling of debt to the country, and we're doing pretty good. And I was going to a good school and a public school in Los Angeles. I felt a certain distance from the policing issue. Like I didn't know that policing was what it was for Black folks. And it was something that I saw hints of, because frankly, my dad would get pulled over, multiple times a year. Right. And I would see that, or I would hear about it, but I still had this thought that, listen, the police are fundamentally, at least we're not, at least we're still in the United States. People have got a chance. I know about the corruption of Indian police. That's a real problem, right? I've heard about that. I've heard about the beatings, but here in the United States, it's great. And I was kind of ignoring it in a sense. And it got to the place where, even, and this is something I'm embarrassed of, right? I'm ashamed about. But like when George Zimmerman he killed Trayvon Martin. At the time I was like on the debate team at school, right? And I was like interested in politics, and I had this distance. From a lot of these things. And I was like looking at it from a sort of more clinical standpoint of pros and cons. And so what I did was I went and I read the Wikipedia page, and I saw, so Trayvon, he threw a punch at George Zimmerman. So, like I'm sad that he got killed, but like, maybe it was self-defense. I was entertaining that thought. So I come home and I start to talk with my dad, and we're just talking about it. And, we would talk about politics. And I said, it's really sad. He said, isn't it really horrible what happened to that boy, Trayvon Martin? I said, yeah, I think it is really tragic, but, at the same time, like he did throw that punch, so why did he have to do that? Or something like that, whatever I said. And my dad was furious. Baba was absolutely furious. We had this long argument, and eventually he just kind of stopped me and he said, listen, you cannot think of this as something separate from yourself, because you go out there, you walk your dog every day, you wear your hoodie, you're with your brown skin. What if some random white vigilante comes up to you, drives up to you, and comes out of the car and it's following you around, like, and you turn around and confront him? Isn't that a natural reaction? And you deserve to die for that. So you don't, and so don't think about this as like somebody else, right? Don't think about this as a Wikipedia article. You have to remember that this is you, and this is your brother and sister. And maybe it's not, and frankly, like it's not me as well, because like I'm not Black and I'm not going to be followed in the same way. But just remembering that distance, like we all carry that, we all participate in that too. I'm honestly wondering, like, what for all of you, if anyone wants to share really quickly, like, what are some moments where you may have had, like, yeah, Arnav, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, that just reminded me of something that happened actually relatively very recently. So to keep myself busy during quarantine and everything, I've been doing a lot more running than usual. And this was about a month ago now. I live in like a white suburb, which is what people would consider the ideal of like a defunded police sort of community where the police are rarely ever called. It's considered safe, so on. And I'm gonna guess the product of redlining, but I was running and I briefly trespassed on private property, like for about 15 seconds max, right? And I was thinking, like, after it happened, I was like, Ahmaud Arbery did almost exactly what I just did, and he died. And then right after I trespassed, I got racially profiled. The details of which are not important, but it made me consider when I went home that day, I considered the fact that I had an experience that was different from Ahmaud Arbery's, obviously, because I made it out alive, but also they came from the same source in that I wasn't harassed by a cop and I was minding my own business. But that being said, I was a non-white person trespassing on private property in a white space. And I think like those little instances of like almost shared experiences can really help like South Asian youth in general understand, like, for what Ridan was saying about motivating, because they're all generally they superficially understand that, like, yes, Black Lives Matter and will probably vote the way you'd want them to, but the specific actions of taking part in community work and those on, like, that specific incident has driven most of my community work in like the last month or so, because it's the same system that creates this like variations on the same problem within both the South Asian community and the Black community in the United States.
Right. Yeah, and this is something me and Onisha and Shankamesha were talking about, that we as South Asians, like, we can touch racism, we could touch, that kind of cancer, and touch, frankly, like some of the stuff that happens to Black and brown people, Black and Latino people, like, daily. So yeah, we have that window of empathy. We have that empathy that we can have, or we could also lean away from it, right? We could lean into, oh no, listen, we're basically white, we're in the suburbs, stuff happens to us, but I'm just gonna pretend that it doesn't. I'm gonna laugh it off, or I'm gonna like, oh, it was just an ignorant comment, right? We're ashamed of it, we don't talk about it, and we're sort of pretending like we're all full, just like the white folks, even though we're playing the side character, right? That's one option. Or we can do what you're doing, Arnav, and remember like that we have a connection here, and even though we're not Black, we still are brown, and so I think that really resonates with me.
Okay. Nesha, did you have anything to add? I think.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, to all our youth speakers. Thank you so much for joining us on this call today. And thank you for anyone in the audience for watching this. I think the biggest, like, my final point is that the discussions don't end here after you log off the Zoom call. Families talk about this at the dinner table. Don't be afraid to have vulnerable, scary, uncomfortable conversations, because that's where change starts happening. That's where you start changing opinions, start changing minds, and not just within your family, in your friends, in your like friend groups, on your like group chats. Like, you can start having these meaningful conversations and keep it in your mind. Don't let it just go away. Like, especially with social media, it's really easy for things to get trending, but this isn't one of those things. It needs to continue. And I think that's my final point. I hope that all of you guys have learned a little bit from us and the panelists today, and to keep having these discussions. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
So thank you, Onisha and Shaq, for organizing this nicely. Thanks to all the youth speakers. I would like to actually say sorry because, you know, you guys had a little bit of a late start and some of the people in the audience had to leave because I was hoping to wrap it up by 3:45 and we have gone over an hour, but there was a glitch in the beginning. But you know, these conversations never stop, and this session is being recorded. Joanta is doing a nice job recording it. It will be shared with everyone, and as Anisha said, we should continue the conversation. I would also like to thank everybody who participated in the first part of the panel. Some of them had to leave, unfortunately, because you know they have other obligation, but really, really thank you. I hope that something meaningful can grow out of it. I really want you to have these stories, and you know, when we get to do voices, and many of you here today are familiar with it because it kind of got deferred. So once we get to it, I would like to hear your voices come out in a very powerful way so that we can actually share it in a live forum with people. So thank you very much. And thanks to the audience for listening. Again, sorry a little bit that it started a little late and it went over a little bit, but you know, we had panelists with a lot to say. Hope it's enjoyable. Please give us feedback and we will share the video. We will share the comments and I will get back to the panelists. If there are questions from the chat, I will get back to the panelists to have them answer. Thank you all. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.